to introduce Dr. Rich Reading. I've known Rich now for 8-10 years, back from bison stuff, but Rich has a very unique background in both the diversity of fauna that he's worked on, but also the places. I think he's worked on 6 continents, if I remember right. Everything from large mammals and predators to now he's the director of the Butterfly
Pavilion?
Butterfly Pavilion in Denver. He spent a long time running the conservation program at the Denver Zoo. So with that, we'll hear about, I think, Mongolia today, right?
Yeah.
So thank you.
Great, thanks. Well, thanks for having me, guys. I appreciate you guys inviting me, and I get to talk about one of the places I love the most, which is Mongolia. And I like to talk about this project. Today we're going to fly at about 30,000 feet and kind of give you an overview of the work we've done, where we've taken what was a paper park, so a park that just existed on paper, wasn't managed, people didn't know, that lived there didn't know it was a park. And we did a lot of work over a lot of years. Certainly very small part of it was me, but a big team of people to convert that into what was then eventually selected as a model protected area by the United Nations for a big parks project that they had. So it really fulfilled one of our goals, was to make this a well-managed model that we could then export to other parts of Mongolia. So I'm going to go over some of the challenges we faced, then I'm going to go over the process that we used. In doing that, I'm going to give you some of the results because it's important to see how some of that work was translated into real-world, on-the-ground successes. And then I'll talk about kind of an overview of some of the successes we've achieved. This is starting off with the research picture of our research station, which started off, these are called gares in Mongolia. You probably know of them as yurts, but we started off with just one. And over the years, we slowly expanded. So now I think we have 11 or 12 gares, and we actually have 3 storage containers now, showers, a gazebo, and all kinds of nice stuff. So it's really come a long way. So for those of you who don't know about Mongolia, just a little bit of background. It's landlocked. It only borders 2 countries, Russia and China. It almost touches Kazakhstan over here, but not quite. It's about the size of Alaska, to give you some sense of the size. And it's the least densely populated country on the planet. So it's only got about 2.5 to 3 million people. Half of them live in the capital of Ulaanbaatar. So you have a country the size of Alaska with people spread out very sparsely. It only paved the first road across the country in 2014. So it's kind of like the American West 150 years ago, which is what my friend told me that got me over to Mongolia for the first time in the 90s. It's all public land. There are no fences, very few paved roads. You can go anywhere you want. You can camp anywhere. Just go and drive. It's an amazing place. It was also, a little more background, the world's second communist country after the Soviet Union. So in 1921, they became a communist country and basically a satellite of the Soviet Union until the big transition from communism to the free market in the early 90s. This is the protected area system of Mongolia. They have a official goal, targeted goal of protecting 30% of their land base. That was a resolution passed by their parliament. So they're on their way. They're at about 21 or 22% now. Some of these protected areas are huge. Just to give you, again, a relative spatial context. So this is the Great Gobi, strictly protected area. And that's about 6 or 7 Yellowstones. So it's a pretty big park. Right next to it, so it's 55,000 square kilometers. Right next to it is this Gobgorovantsakan, which is about 23,000 square kilometers. I don't know the British system very well, so pardon me. I'm going to use metrics. And so where do we work? We work in this little park. It's a nature reserve, and we intentionally picked a nature reserve because nature reserves are run by the local governments. So it's a federal designation, but it's run by the local governments, and the local governments get no resources from the federal government to manage these reserves. So our idea was, that's why it was a paper park, right? They didn't have the resources necessary to do what they needed to do. So how do we go about working with a very poor country? That's very fast. In a really rural context with people who don't have the resources to manage their protected area. And what were the challenges we faced? Well, one of them is overgrazing. And at the end of communism, you can see, which was right about in here, the population of livestock shot up. They had a couple harsh winters, it crashed. That it shot up again, another couple harsh winters, it crashed. But the overall trajectory is one of increasing numbers of livestock. It's really unsustainable, and it's one of the big challenges we face. There are in particular, an increasing number of cashmere goats. So that's the yellow. These are all the livestock converted. We use AUMs, they use sheep units, so they convert everything to a sheep. So a cow is equal to 4 sheep, I think, a horse 5. A goat is equal to 0.75 sheep. So it's a way to standardize the units. But you can see that the cashmere, because it's a very valuable cash crop, once they entered the global economy, the number of cashmere goats increased. And that has further implications because, as many of you probably know, goats will eat just about anything. And so their impact on the environment is a little bit harsher than some of the other ungulates that we have out there. So definitely a big issue is this, and everyone realizes it's an issue. Even the herders realize it's an issue. But part of the reason that they keep increasing numbers even though they crash is to make sure they can get through these crashes with some animals left in their herds. They don't have the support network they had under communism, so they have to make it on their own. So it's actually a strategy that they have adopted, which is increase your herd size as fast as you can, because you never know when you're going to have a really harsh winter and you're going to lose half your herd. Another threat is poaching, and there's really 2 kinds of poaching. So this is subsistence poaching. You can tell because the only thing that was taken is the meat, but then there's also poaching for the trade with China. So it does have that long boundary with China, if you recall. Traditional Chinese medicine, here's a traditional Chinese medicine shop. Here's a whole bunch of antelope horns, which are the same as these horns, that are valued for traditional Chinese medicines. Furs as well. We had very popular animals like marmots. Marmots lived like prairie dogs on the plains and prairies, the steppes of Mongolia. Big colonies spread out across vast acreages, billions of marmots. Well, marmots became very popular as a clothing item, the fur of marmots, and so they lost billions of marmots to China. And now the species is critically endangered. It's listed on the Mongolian Red List as a critically endangered species. Same with elk. We used to have elk come down into the capital city and eat the garbage in the winter times. They were actually a hazard because every year someone would get gored. Well, elk antlers became a marketable commodity as well for trade, especially with Korea. And the population of elk went from probably a couple 100,000 to probably in the thousands, and it's also listed as a critically endangered species right now. So make no mistake about it, the trade with China has had a vast and dramatic impact on the wildlife of the country, and it's something that needed to be addressed. Mining. There's again a couple kinds of mining. There's commercial mining for things like coal, uranium. They have molybdenum. They have a lot of gold. They have platinum. They have silver. They have copper. They have fluorspar. So there are big mines and mining companies that have leased out 45% of the country either for mining or exploration. So that's a big impact. There's also wildcat miners. They call them ninja miners. The reason they call them ninja miners is because they pan for gold and they wear their pans on the back, and the Mongolians think they look like ninja turtles. You know, anyway, you know what I'm talking about. So they actually call them ninja miners, and they do much more damage. They come into an area, they create these holes, they leave, they don't clean up. They use cyanide, they use dynamite. They create all kinds of problems for the environment, and it was a big problem in Nart actually, where we had a lot of illegal miners coming in and a lot of illegal poaching when we first started working there. And then the final big challenge we had was inadequate management. So they just didn't have the training or the resources to manage their protected areas. They didn't have the school systems. They didn't have programs like you guys are blessed with here at Utah State. They didn't have the money, and so things like illegal mining were taking place, poaching of wild animals in the park, and more illegal mining. So these are the kind of the challenges we faced when we first started working there. And so what did we do? We set up a really, I'm going to talk about these as steps, but in reality they overlapped one another. So even though I'm going to say they happened like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, they didn't. They happened in concert with one another. And the first thing is I'm a firm believer in science. You're at universities, I'm assuming that you are too. And rigorous science has to underlie all the work we do. So the first thing we did to get off the ground was start research. And we started with these guys. These are Argali sheep. The biggest sheep in the world lives in Mongolia. They get to be 400 pounds, so that's a pretty big sheep. It's about twice the size of a bighorn sheep. So their curls can, this is actually not even a really big male. The curls can go a double loop, go all the way out. Here's a female. They have pretty big horns in and of themselves in a yearling. So you get a sense. Here's a female. A lot of people think they're males because their horns are pretty big, much bigger than our dagger-horned ewes in bighorn sheep country. And they're endangered, or they were endangered. And so we started out, I have a buddy a Mongolian buddy, who's just crazy gaga about Argali sheep. And so he really wanted to study them. So we started with them. It's an iconic animal of Nart. The local people love them. They revere them, actually. And it's the people from outside the area who would come and poach them. Quickly, we realized there was a good population of ibex as well, another mountain ungulate, about half the size of an Argali, also impressive horns. It's a goat, so we wanted to understand how they were doing as well, how they were partitioning resources and surviving in the same habitats as the Argali sheep. So we started this in 2000, and it's ongoing. Every year we're collaring animals and doing long-term studies, pumping out papers. Of course, when you're studying ungulates, you need to understand what they're eating, so we started vegetative studies. We set up 160 random plots across the protected area, and we continue to monitor those today. So we're understanding one thing that we're getting data on that we didn't expect to when we first started was climate change. So we're seeing a real big change, a shift from this steep dominated grasslands to one that's dominated by artemisias or wormwoods. So those are really unpalatable to most wildlife and most livestock. So it's not a good change by any stretch of the imagination. So vegetative monitoring. We started raptors. So this is an area of really big rocky outcrops in the middle of a big, vast plain. And so it attracts raptors. It attracts raptors in big numbers. And attracts raptors that are global conservation significance. These Eurasian black vultures are the biggest old world raptor. So the ones in Mongolia, they're variable in size. They used to stretch, their range used to stretch all the way from Spain to Korea. But the ones in Mongolia are much bigger. So these are about the size of condors, so 10-foot wingspan. So think of your basketball hoop. So that's a pretty big bird. And really endangered in Europe and in the other western parts of their range in Western Asia, but doing pretty well in Mongolia. So we want to understand why they're doing well and what aspects of their ecology can we understand, so we know when we start trying to restore them in other places, we've reached what we can consider a stable population. But other things nest there too. Lots of other species. These kestrels, lesser kestrels, another species of conservation concern that's listed in Europe. Again, doing very well in Nart. We have hundreds of breeding pairs. And then we studied, because we were studying these breeding raptors, we just started studying everything in terms of raptors. And there's a lot of different raptors, saker falcons, endangered species, little owls, black kites, golden eagles, all kinds of stuff. We started a small carnivore study that lasted about 5 years. And again, we were looking at, I'm particularly interested in just as a scientist in resource partitioning and how some of these species that are similar sized overlap. So we had a couple students who actually studied, these are Corsic foxes, which are a lot like swift foxes, or kit foxes. So they're ecological equivalent. Red foxes, same species. An Asian badger, which is different than the European badger, and a Pallas's cat, which is kind of like our bobcat, but a little bit smaller. So all these animals are about the same size. These are the biggest by far. So how do they partition resources to persist? And what are some of the threats to them? Because their fur is very highly valued by the Chinese as well. When you start studying small carnivores, you become interested in their food as well. So we started monitoring small mammals and lizards in 2004, and that's ongoing. And again, we've seen, as climate change has taken place, we've seen this major shift. It's really astounding to see the changes that have taken place just in the 15, 17 years we've been doing work with these small mammals. So we used to catch these mountain voles, it's Alticolas, the genus, and a lot of gerbils. And we never used to get these jerboas, which are like the ecological equivalents of kangaroo rats. And then over time, it's really shifted. And now we primarily get jerboas and these hamsters. And so it's been this big shift, not surprising because the vegetation shifted, in the populations of small mammals. And we got one student who's hopefully going to start to write this up pretty soon. We started a hedgehog study that went for about 10 or 11 years. We got 2 species of hedgehog. Again, Why do we have two species of hedgehog? This species, the Darien hedgehog, has never been studied. It's really poorly understood. So a lot of our work focused on this critter. This is a long-eared hedgehog, but they're both about the same size. They're not supposed to be in the same place. They are. So how are they able to persist in the same environment? And what do we need to do as conservation managers to ensure that we have healthy populations of both of them? So started a hedgehog study. Siberian marmots, I told you about them. They're critically endangered. They crashed in our study site. Really, our work here mimics some of the work that I did for my PhD, which looks at prairie dogs, and prairie dogs as keystone species out on the Great Plains. So a lot of species really depend on marmots for their burrows. They feed on marmots, and they benefit from the changes that marmots induce in their environment through their grazing and their burrowing activity. Again, very similar to prairie dogs. So we just published a paper recently looking at some lizards that are really dependent on marmot colonies, both inhabited and uninhabited, because a lot of the colonies now are empty. So pretty interesting stuff on marmots. Large carnivores, we have really two large carnivores. We have the lynx, the Eurasian lynx. It's not the bunny killer that we know of in this country. These guys eat. This picture was actually taken after this lynx was chasing down a gazelle. So they eat big prey. They eat sheep and wolves. We have gray wolves, same species. Reptile ecology, again, we're interested in just about everything. And one thing I'll say about this, so we've studied the snakes, we've studied the lizards, we started studying bats, we're still on doing that, and now we started more recently studying the invertebrates. So why all this diversity of studies? Well, one is, of course, we want to understand the entire system. If we're going to manage the system, we need to understand the system. But another reason is that it's the next point I'm going to talk about, is we want to build capacity in a wide variety of fields and a wide variety of disciplines. So we want to have people who are well-trained as herpetologists, who are well-trained as ornithologists, who are well-trained as mammalogists, who are well-trained in all these different disciplines in horticulture or plant ecology. And it's really led to a lot of work. I think you might even recognize this paper. Some of you might recognize this paper. Anyway, we've produced 125 peer-reviewed publications, which is far and away the largest output of research from any one site in Mongolia. So we have the best studied ecosystem in Mongolia by far. It's really becoming an LTER, long-term ecological research site, and that was our hope too, is to create first one, and now hopefully replicate it and create others across Mongolia so we can understand the system, especially in the face of the big changes we face with climate change and with growing human populations. So we didn't just do biological science. I'm trained, as Michael said, in a variety of fields. So I have dual degrees in social sciences and ecology. So I have too many degrees. Don't do it. It's too much work. But it fascinates me. So we've done a lot of attitudinal and value research to understand what the people were thinking, why they valued nature, because they really do in Mongolia, and what they didn't like about some of the stuff we're doing, and how to make our program relevant to them. And so to try to garner the kind of support we need to develop a really effective outreach education program, you first need to do that research. So you can't just think you're going to do the biological research and pretend like you're done. You got to do the social science work too, I would argue. We also discovered that there were archaeological sites all over Nart. Again, it's not surprising. It's this really unique, beautiful terrain. There's rocky outcrops in the middle of this flat, almost featureless Gobi Desert. And so people have been inhabiting this area for thousands of years, and we have found literally thousands of sites from Stone Ages to era of Genghis Khan. We found only the third and fourth ever grave sites from the era of Genghis Khan. Those grave sites are really hard to find. And inside them we found human remains and saddles and all kinds of really, really unique kind of archaeological treasures that before people didn't know about, and really helping understand some of the processes. And it's gone all the way up to this, real recent ruin. This is an old lamasery, a monastery, a Buddhist monastery that was destroyed in the 30s. So in the 30s, Stalin reigned in the Soviet Union and destroyed and really suppressed religion Well, Mongolia had Choi Balston, who was the Stalin of Mongolia, and he murdered probably 20,000 lamas, which are the priests of Buddhism, which doesn't sound like much, but if you consider the fact that there were probably only 600,000 Mongolians at the time, that's a pretty big number, and destroyed all but 3 temples. So there are only 3 temples remaining at the end of Choi Balston's reign of terror. So a lot of fascinating work with archaeology. Again, we want to protect the cultural resources, not just the ecological resources of protected areas, so we need to understand them. We need to understand how to manage them. So the second step, which again is the first step too, because from the very beginning we work to build capacity. You have to, one of my mantras that I always say is you have to build local capacity. If you're not, you're whistling in the wind. You're not going to have sustainable long-term conservation programs if you don't develop local talent and ability to do the work that you're doing. So we worked with professionals, and this was really reciprocal. So I learned as much as they learned from me, I learned from them. And I can say that of all the people we brought over to do some training. So we trained rangers, we trained park managers, we trained biologists, and then the true measure of success is when our Mongolians who we've trained are training other Mongolians. So we get that multiple generation effect on training. And that's really what we want. And of course, students at all levels. So we work with students who are in elementary school all the way up through postgraduate. Most of them by far are Mongolians. We've had a few American students, but by far, again, we want to work with the local students. We want to bring capacity up to its level. And now we have our Mongolians like Ghana who are running the program for me over there and having their own students. So I like to consider them my grand students. I call them, or my great-grand students in some cases, because I've been there so long and I'm getting old. But it's what you need. You need to develop this long-term system of rigorous science. And to tell you the truth, the ecological sciences that were in place when I got to Mongolia, and I don't want to belittle or denigrate the Soviet system, but they weren't replicable. And so it was science of a different sort than we're used to. It wasn't the hypothetical deductive stuff or even induction or retroduction. It was really a different kind of approach to science, and it made for a really hard system on which to build knowledge that we've adopted and embraced in the West. But the young Mongolians have adopted it well, and they're starting to take over in the universities, and you see this change taking place and this wave of change in the educational system in Mongolia, and it's great to witness and it's great to be a part of. And I'm proud to have had about this much of a role, but some role. So the third step is park management, and I'm not a park manager, so what do you do when you're coming into a park and you want to manage a park? Well, the first thing we did, this is the park, and you can see it's really, really beautiful. The first thing we did was hire a ranger. So we knew we had to stop some of the illegal poaching. We hired a ranger. But one of the early things we did is we developed a sister park relationship. So we found a park in California, Anza-Borrego Desert State Park. It's the biggest state park in the lower 48 states. It stretches all the way from Palm Springs to Mexico. It's a huge park. Their iconic species is the desert bighorn sheep. Perfect. Our iconic species is the Argali desert sheep. They have great archaeological resources. We have great archaeological resources. They have a lot of wildlife and professionalism that I don't have. So we created a sister park, a relationship with them. Here's Lynn Rhodes. She's the head of all law enforcement, or was the head of all law enforcement for the Park Service in California. Here's Mark Jorgensen. He was the superintendent of Anza-Borrego Desert State Park. We got a resolution of a state park signed by, at the time, the governor. You know who he was? It was Arnold Schwarzenegger. So they were very, very excited. They got pins with Arnie's name. They were like, the Terminator, get him to come here. We did invite him. He never quite made it out. But the park also has a Friends of Anza-Borrego Desert State Park, and that Friends group would donate money, equipment, like motorcycles for our rangers. So they came over, and they started doing all kinds of stuff. I don't want to go there yet, like training the rangers. So they'd bring over their rangers from Anza-Borrego and train our rangers in all kinds of different disciplines, from law enforcement to first aid, to how do you deal with local people, to how do you welcome people, how do you get people to obey the laws without being draconian about it. which in some ways was really easy to do because all the rangers we hired are local herders. So this guy's a nomadic pastoralist. He's one of our herders. And we do that intentionally. Number one, they know the people, they know the terrain really well. Number two, we're developing a livelihood enhancement for local people, so they're going to be much more supportive of our work. And number three, they're just really great guys. I mean, I can't say enough about them. So we did a lot of training. We also did something very unique. This is Amga, the guy who loves the Argali sheep. This is his logo for his Wildlife Research Center. And that research center, this little NGO, was designated to run the park. So this was something new for Mongolia, where an NGO would run the park for the government. The local government, they have IMOCs, which are provinces. They have SUMs, which are like counties. They simply didn't have the capacity. So we worked with them, and they understood that. And to their huge credit, they realized, wow, we need some help. So for the first time, a nature reserve is being run by an NGO, which again, I think is a huge step forward. It has a management advisory team. So of course, there's advisors, us people, mostly foreigners from outside, although Ghana's Mongolian, who help them. And then they have the management team itself, which are Mongolians, and a lot of them, like Soren, who's legally responsible for the management of the park, has to be involved. So we have this management team who advises the Argali Research Center. And what do? We started doing stuff like I didn't even think of. The people from Anza-Borrego said the first thing you got to do is put up boundary markers. You got to let people know, put up signs, let them know they're in a park, let them know the park exists. Give them a chance to follow the law before you start enforcing the law really, really rigorously. And we'd already started to enforce the law, but I was like, yeah, of course, that's an obvious first step. How did I miss it? But things like that are important. We also started creating ranger zones. We got a government to sponsor building of infrastructure, so they have a vehicle, they have a park headquarters, they have maps, they have all kinds of infrastructure and staff now that enable them to do their job, whereas before there was nothing in place. So a little bit about some of our research and how it translates to management actions and why research is important. So one of the things we found out, of course, was that that when you're looking at mortality factors, domestic dogs, here's a little bandana, here's the hamstrung Argali. So one of our major causes of mortality for Argali sheep was domestic dogs. They were killing sheep. Here's another couple of dogs that took down this Argali sheep. And so what we did is we started to then work with the local herders, and we said, your your dogs are killing Argali sheep. And they were like, oh my God, that's terrible. You shoot our dogs. I'm like, I'm not shooting your dogs. No, that's not the point. And the point is not shoot your dogs. The point is you manage your dogs better so that they don't kill livestock, they don't kill sheep. They're like, oh yeah, that's a better idea. So that's good. Other things, so we started getting data. Here's some data from IBEX, and you can see they like this area right in here. Here's some data on Argali, and again, you can see they're like a very similar area. And then, whoops, what did I just do? Okay, never mind. Here's where the herders are, and you can see the herders kind of like some of the same areas. So we got together with the herders, we took the data, we showed them the data, we said, here's a really important habitat for the Argali and the ibex and the vultures and other things. Here's where you guys are utilizing the landscape. But we want to create some areas because I should preface this by saying in nature reserves, you're allowed to have grazing. You're allowed to have livestock grazing. So it's not illegal for them to be in there. They're totally legal. But we wanted to create some core areas. We wanted to zonate the park. And so we did. Based on what they agreed to is we created these core zones, which are these brown areas, and these tourism zones, which are these variable colored areas. And they agreed not to raise their small animals inside those core areas. So they don't manage their big animals. They only manage their sheep and goats. The horses, the cows, and the camels, they just let roam and they go and gather them when they want. But by far, the largest number of animals in Mongolia are sheep and goats. So this is a huge thing. And we got a paper that's in revision right now with Science that shows that after the creation of these core zones and within the core zones, it's had a huge impact on reproduction success in Argali sheep. And so they're having an impact. That's the good news. So by getting these data, it's having real world influences on the ground. And then ICNART expansion. So we showed data to the local governments. So we have like marmot colonies here, active marmot colonies. This is where they are on this map. We have vulture nests. You can see the black is the ICNART boundary. And you can see that a lot of the nests fall outside the park boundary. And the different colors are just if they're in a tree. There are some trees or on a rocky outcrop. Ibex locations, again, you can see that a number of the Ibex locations fall outside the park boundary. And Argali locations, you can see again, a number of the locations fall outside the park boundaries. So when we showed this to the government's like, well, we need to create local protected areas. We need to protect these habitats. So they created these local protected areas, that's the red, that almost surround ICNART and cover all these areas. So when I come back to talking about indicators of success, here's a huge indicator of success. Here's a local government saying, we need to create a local protected area to protect these habitats that aren't protected by the boundaries that were drawn up by bureaucrats in the capital city because it's not doing the job it should do. So eventually what we're going to try to do, of course, is get the government to create this, to make this an official federal expansion of the protected area. But in the meantime, it's already being protected at the local level. And we moved our park boundary markers from here, the black line to the red line, so we have expansion. So again, our data had a huge influence on local people. God, I did it again. We also started to understand migratory corridors with some of the raptors. We found out that these black vultures migrate to Korea. So we started putting telemetry units on them, and we found out none of the adults left. And now what we know is just the young migrate back and forth. So it's a very fascinating system where the young migrate back and forth to Korea, but the adults maintain their territories and stay in Mongolia the whole time. So it also has repercussions for working with China and Korea on protecting these migratory corridors and having stopover points. So again, some very obvious implications of our ecological research. Gosh, I keep doing that. Sorry about that. More management. So one of the things I'm really proud of is that one day one of the herders came up to us and he said, he lives in the park, and he said, can I get your help, And I said, my buddy's translating. Amga, the guy I showed you before, was crazy about Argali sheep. And I said, sure, we want to help you guys anyway. What do you want? He's like, well, before there was a park, they had all these exploratory pits that the Russians dug looking for minerals, and I want to restore it. And can you help me write a grant? And I'm like, oh my God, this is exactly what I want. And so we said, yeah, we can help you write a grant. So we helped them write a grant. They got the grant, and they did the restoration themselves. So they came in a tractor and they did the restoration work. So again, great example to me of success. And so why did that happen? Well, because of step 4. We did a lot of education outreach activities, including livelihood enhancement, and that built us general goodwill among the people. And so they love it. They love the park. They love the work we're doing. They love all the staff. I mean, it's all Mongolians except for a few of us gringos out there anyway. But they really like it. And so what are some of the things we did? We developed this really innovative nomadic trunk program, which is a trunk full of educational materials that travels around from school to school. So they love it because they're nomadic peoples. The trunks, this has now been incorporated into its own NGO, its own nonprofit organization in Mongolia, so it goes around. And a lot of the other bigger nonprofit organizations like the Nature Conservancy, like WWF, and like Wildlife Conservation Society have funded Nomadic Nature Trunks Incorporated to do this kind of nature that goes around the communities and provides educational information about ecology and why it's important to conserve our natural resources. We ran teacher workshops, why are food webs important? So train the trainers, train the teachers. We provide educational materials. We help them develop them. So books, posters, all kinds of stuff. Here's a bunch of materials that they can use in their classrooms. They're hungry. They're starving for materials. It's a very poor country. So everything we bring over, they love. And we started a school exchange program. I don't think this did a lot for education, but it did a lot for goodwill. And so we have kids going from Denver to ICNART and ICNART to Denver, back and forth with local schools in Denver. It happens every other year. And they just love it. They're like, this is so amazing for our kids. What an opportunity. The teachers get to go. So it's a great program. It builds goodwill. It builds recognition of how Americans view the importance of nature conservation, even in places like Mongolia. And I can't tell you the amount of pride it's engendered in the people there. unbelievable. We have Conservation Day, so we tell people about the work we're doing. We have singing and poetry contests. We do games where they learn about education and outreach, and all the local people come. It's a huge day. We develop things that the Mongolians love to put stuff up in their gers, their yurts. And so you give them a poster or a calendar, especially if it's a calendar that's made by the artwork that their kids made about showing the importance of the nature of Nart, they hang it up immediately. So it's a great way to reach kids. I mean people. Gosh, I keep doing that. And then we hosted local meetings. Some of the meetings were about nature conservation, and some of them were they just needed a place to meet. You know, these are nomadic peoples. They have herder associations and other things like that, and we let them meet in our facilities. Why not? Again, it engenders goodwill, and it makes them our friends, which is what we want. And then one of the most important things we do is we do in livelihood enhancement. And so another one of my mantras is empower women. Men in developing countries have a very short-term rationality. They tend to think of how am I going to get food on the table tomorrow, whereas the women are thinking more long-term. What kind of environment are my kids going to grow up in? What am I going to do? So in all the places that I've worked, I've always tried to empower women by setting up things like women's cooperatives or women's collectives. And in this case, we did a microloan. We gave them a felt press so they could produce felt products that they sell to local tourists. Do you think they got it? Well, here's what they named themselves. We didn't tell them. Nart is our future. So they got it. They got the link. That their livelihood enhancement, the money that they're getting and donating to their family, sometimes a good 50% of their income, an increase of 50% of their income, is because that park exists there today. And ecotourism. We helped set up a high-end ecotourism camp. We took the local officials on a tour, and we gave them the different options of the kind of tourism they could have. And they opted for low numbers but high-end tourism, which I think is great because it reduces the impact. And people come, they provide jobs, they rent camels. So local people are making money through that, plus money goes back to the park. And then they also have livelihood enhancements through park employment. Like I said, all of our rangers, sorry about that, all of our rangers are local herders. They sell us goats and sheep for our staff. When we catch our Argali and ibex, what we do is we drive them into nets. And we use these guys on horseback to chase the sheep and the goats into the nets. They call themselves Chenghis's cavalry. So it's like Genghis Khan, you know, or Genghis Khan, I guess we call it in this country. So they do get a lot of benefit from the fact that the research station is there operational. We hired people. The manager of the research station is a local guy. The manager's assistant is a local woman. So lots of opportunities, especially for a small community. So the last step is getting sustainable income. So how do we do that? This was our biggest challenge. So one way is through tourism, and we did set up this tourist camp, this high-end tourist camp. There's also a lower-end tourist camp that caters mostly to Mongolians. There's a mineral hot springs that people go and drink the water. It's very sulfur-laden, so it smells like rotten eggs, but it's supposed to be really good for your digestion. It's carbonated. And people come from all over. So there's money, there's opportunity for people to go low end if they want, but high end if they want that. So it generates income. We sell things to the tourists who come, like guidebooks, maps. But one of the things that we're really pushing for now are mining offset fees. So the Mongolian government has passed a really forward-thinking law in the last few years where they require mining companies to pay $50 per hectare for every hectare of land that they impact. And that money has to go towards a nature conservation initiative. So our argument is that money should go to places like Nart to help manage the protected area. And I think it'll go a long way. The mining companies, in some cases, are more than happy to do it. In other cases, they fight it a little bit, but some of the bigger mines are more than happy to do it. So I think it's really going to lead to a revolution in the way you see nature management in Mongolia if we can convince the government that most of the money should go to park management. The rest of the money, we're arguing, should go towards the formation of a wildlife service. They don't have one to manage wildlife and nature outside of protected areas. That doesn't exist in Mongolia today. And then finally, oh my God, I keep doing that. And then finally, transportation crossing fees. So we get a lot of damage to the park through these big trucks that come through and just drive because there's no paved roads in Mongolia. So we're going to start charging them pretty high fees to either make a lot of money or to encourage them to go around the park. Actually, I'd like to have them go around the park, although I think the park manager was hoping to get the money. I'm hoping they go around the park. So I think we're in pretty good shape right now for sustainable income flow to the protected area. So those are our 5 steps. So what did it all come down to? What did it mean? Well, we've got a lot of rewards. So the Academy of Sciences gave me this Kubla Khan Award, which is a research award. There's only been 10 of them ever given. The Mongolian Education University has given us an award. We've gotten an award from the Ministry of Nature and Green Development, from the Ministry of Science and Education, from the local province, from the county, from the Colorado Mongolian Society. There's a lot of Mongolians living in Colorado. It's one of the biggest Mongolian communities in the United States, and they have all kinds of cultural events in the Denver area. It's pretty nice. They gave us a nice award. Association of Zoos and Aquariums gave us a nice award for the work we're doing over there. And then, of course, culminating with this designation as a model protected area by the United Nations Development Project, which I think was a great honor. And they used it as a model for other parks in Mongolia to come and look at how we did what we did so they could try to replicate that work. So this is all great. I'm really excited about it, but really the real indicators of success are not this, right? These are just awards. So the real indicators of success are the biological and social indicators. So what are the biological and social indicators? Well, one of the biological indicators is our ibex and argali populations have gone up by 2 to 3 times. So that's a huge increase. Here's a species that was listed on the Red Book. It's still listed in Mongolia as an endangered species. Well, we've got the only population that we know of that's increasing. And it's become a source population. So the argali population in Mongolia is now pulsing out animals, and we're having people come to us and say, we found some of your collared animals. That's why we know it's our animals, in places we haven't seen them in 50 years. You know, one old man was crying. I'm like, well, I've got argali back. I'm so excited. Really nice to see. So we've created a source population that's repopulating areas around Nart. That these animals, argali, one thing you might notice is they're really long-legged. So they're coursing animals. They'll go far. They run. So they travel much further than bighorn sheep. So they will repopulate areas if you give them a chance. Vulture fledglings, so the vulture population is going up. We're fledging more vultures. I'm not sure we have a lot more space for more nesting vultures. You saw the map earlier. There's a lot of dots. We did see an initial increase in the population of breeding pairs from about 50 to about 70, but I think we're kind of at capacity. But at first, a lot of them were being persecuted by people. A lot of local people think that the vultures are actually eagles and they prey on their baby animals, so they would kill them. They don't do that anymore. And so we have an increase in fledging rates, which is amazing. And we've had no recorded poaching or illegal mining in the last 7+ years. So we've shut down illegal mining. We've shut down illegal poaching. In fact, we had really good success with the official mining companies really early on. At first, they were doing incursions into the park. They were unhappy with us. We had some big fights with them. But then later, they recruited us to help them because the ninja miners, remember I told you about those ninja wildcat miners, were coming in and mining in Nart and in their leased areas outside of the park, and they wanted our help. So we started collaborating with the mining companies to really stop all the ninja miners as well, which we've been able to do. So that's great news. And then increased local recognition and support. So we have a very different situation than you find in America, right? So here you have the local people are the ones who really are supporting this park. They want to see the park expanded. The only reason that those local protected areas are not federal protected areas already is because the people in the cities don't want that because they're worried that they're going to lose mining opportunities. So you have just the inverse of what you find in a place like Utah for the most part, where the local people are by far the most supportive of the conservation initiatives, and the people in the city are the ones trying to fight it. So, this support, and I gave you a few examples of the support we've seen. The women's group naming themselves Nart as our future. Local people coming saying, hey, can we do a park cleanup? Hey, can we help restore this land? I think it's great. And it personally makes me very proud of my Mongolian colleagues because they're the ones who really did it. And let's see what I have. Oh, I did it one more time. We expanded the protected area and increased collaborations to protect species that move inside and outside of. So we have Koreans coming over there now. We have Russians coming over. So we're talking about international collaboration, all based on some of the work we're doing just in Nart, which is pretty amazing. And the last thing I was starting to say is that, this work, I'm presenting it, but it's really the Mongolians who did most of this, did 90% of the work. What I did is facilitated that work, and I brought people in when they needed help, and I brought in money when they needed money, and I brought in other resources when they needed other resources. But they did the work. I couldn't be more proud of a group of people in my life, and we had a lot of supporters from a lot of different groups. So we had money from, obviously, tons of groups. And with that, I think I will take some questions if you guys have any. Thank you. Yes?
So it sounded like you had a lot of support from the government, but was there any resistance to any of this sort of
There was resistance at the federal government, actually, in the Protected Areas Bureau initially. Because so it's this weird thing where the local governments are responsible for managing the reserve, but the Protected Areas Bureau is somehow involved too, and it's not very clear in the law. And so they at first weren't very supportive of, say, a local NGO running the protected area, and they weren't very supportive of, they're not supportive of the expansion of the park yet. But the local governments are very supportive of it. And so, they hold, in a lot of ways, they carry more weight and more sway. And in almost every way, it's more important to get them on board because, again, these are nomadic peoples. They're out there all the time. So like our rangers, they're going to see if illegal activities are coming inside the local protected areas, and they're going to stop it. And so it's going to work better that way. So does that answer that question? Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
It seems like a lot of the local peoples, it was kind of this knowledge is power, where you present evidence and they use it to make decisions. And I know you have this thing about UNDP using it as a model system, but a lot of cases the evidence is there, but the decisions contradict that. So how can this kind of translate in those?
Right. So if you look at some of the social science theory behind that, why does that happen? It's because it all goes back to value structures and core values and peripheral values and how people orient their values. And so what you have to do is people will support data that supports their value system. And they'll call data that doesn't support their value system fake news or whatever you want to call it these days. These days, fake news. Pardon me, I've been out of the country for a year. But and so the first step is getting their buy-in and support for nature conservation and why you want to do it. The second step is showing them the data. So once they bought in that, yes, we need to preserve these animals because people are coming to see the argali, they are. They're definitely coming to see the argali. They're definitely coming to see the vultures. Once they bought off on that, then when you show them the data, this is an important habitat for the argali and the vultures, then that's easy. It's a no-brainer for them. Well, we got to protect that because we got to protect our sheep and we got to protect our vultures. It's not the government's like you hear here. Those are the government's sheep. Those are the government's prairie dogs. Those are the government's this. Those are the government's that. You probably hear that all the time, right? Those are the government's coyotes. You need to control them. It's the other way around. These are our sheep. This is our protected area. We want to protect it. We want to make it better. We want to protect it. So why do they move out of this area to graze their sheep and their goats? It's because they know it's important for the argali and ibex, and they want to keep those populations there. Now I will say that we have an advantage in Mongolia in that the culture is one of it's based in animism and then Buddhism, which has this underlying respect and love for nature anyway. That's a little bit stronger, I would argue, than the Judeo-Christian heritage of love and respect for nature. And so you have that going for you from the get-go. But in any case, before you present data, you want to make sure that the people you're sending data to have the right value system and those values are oriented correctly. And if you don't, you're probably going to fail. And they're probably not going to believe you. And that has to do with a lot of social science stuff that we can go in at length at some point and talk about. But that's the reason. And it's really clear in the social science literature. So, is that, yeah.
So how much interest is there in the tourism? Are there a lot of Mongolians from the capital or elsewhere that are coming to the park to visit?
More and more Mongolians are coming to the park to visit. We're not having as much success as we wanted with the international tourism, so we need to try to build that still. And that's a little bit about advertising and a little bit about how they manage those international tourists. In my opinion, they're not showing them the wildlife like I can show them. Like I can, when people come and I show them argali and ibex, and I can get really close to them. It used to be when we first worked in Nart, it was like anywhere else in Mongolia where a sheep would see you at 5 kilometers and would start running because it was poached so heavily. Now I can get from me to you to argali, and they'll just stand there and look at me in certain areas, like where they see the researchers all the time, like especially our research valley. But in other areas, still, you can get very close. So for some reason, they're not showing them the things that I think are going to really lead to that word of mouth, but they're also not advertising well enough. And so that's something we're working on. But local people are definitely stepping up their tourism. A lot of them come and camp. In fact, we had to move our research camp because the first place we had our research camp became so popular among local tourists that it was just a headache, frankly. we wanted to go someplace where we didn't have people partying all night, or, camping and talking. So, but it's definitely, Mongolians like nature, so they definitely come out. And it's become much more popular in Mongolia. Now we got to do international. Yeah.
Lots going on for a long period of time. You're talking about sustainable funding going into the future. How did you pay for this up till now? I mean, was there a major source of reliable funding, or is this just pedaling fast and getting whatever you can?
Pedaling fast and getting what we can. We've never. So one thing I'll say that again I'm pretty proud of, that speaks volumes to what you can do with not a lot of money, is our operation probably costs, especially initially, between $70,000 and $120,000 a year. Not a huge amount of money. And I can tell you that other groups that have asked for our help, one group that asked for our help was pumping in like $1 million a year and not having the success we're having. So they wanted to know, and they came and asked us, what are we doing wrong? So
You have too much money.
part of it is sometimes you do have too much money. In a place like Mongolia, you can have too much money, and then then corruption steps in, right? But a lot of it, Earthwatch has been a great partner. We've had a lot of Earthwatch volunteers. The Denver Zoo has been a great partner, and Anza-Borrego. Those are the three biggest partners in terms of real dollar cash. And then the Mongolian side, the Academy of Sciences and the universities have been amazing. I don't want to forget the Trust for Mutual Understanding, which has been a good supporter. So we've always had a steady influx of money. Plus, people who come to visit would then start donating, and so that started to build over time. One good thing about Earthwatch, I like Earthwatch, but I don't like Earthwatch. I don't manage it anymore. It's really hard to manage. They take about half the money that people pay, so it's huge overhead and a lot of bureaucracy. But one good thing about it is a lot of those people become long-term donors. So the longer you go on, the more long-term donors you get that continue to give $1,000, $2,000, and that builds up. So you're getting all of a sudden $30,000, $40,000. But a lot of it is, just me trying to find money. But at this point, the amount of money that's infused into the system is really dropping dramatically. And they're picking up the pace themselves, which is good. It has to happen. It's got to be sustainable local funding, or it's like same thing with capacity development. If it's not local, forget it. It's not going to work. Yeah.
This is wondering how the pastoralists deal with forage scarcity, and if the park offers any kind of like forage bank, or can they graze when things get thin, or you help them off-take and?
Yeah, so we've talked a lot about grass banks for the pastoralists, but the way they deal with it now is they move, and so that's the long time solution to a very unpredictable environment, which is the Gobi, where you have systems that get a lot of rain in some areas and no rain in other places. They just move like crazy, and they'll move far. They'll move way outside the park, and they'll disappear, and I won't see them. So they're mostly there in the wintertime. You don't see them much in the summertime. It is their winter grazing habitat. So the way they deal with it traditionally is move, try to find good pastures. The way we want them to deal with it in the future is to try to restrict the livestock, have grass banks, have bigger, healthier animals that can survive periods of stress and hard winters and drought. And so that's actually probably the next big piece that we need to tackle is grazing reform. And the local herders want grazing reform, but they don't know what form it should take. They definitely don't want privatization of land. They tried that in the late 90s, and there was a massive revolt across the country. And I don't think it's good for the country, actually. I'll also say that there's a theory out there, the non-equilibrium theory of grazing. Do you know about the non-equilibrium theory? Which basically suggests that in these really harsh environments like the Gobi, that you can't overgraze it. Because the system's so harsh and so ephemeral that by the time you get your livestock herd up to the point where it might start to degrade the land, you're going to get such a harsh drought or winter, they're all going to die off. And you saw those big crashes. I don't know if that's true because you see the trend is still going up. Some of the range managers I've talked to, we've had big debates. And most of the people who are, I think, I trust a little more, the range managers say that, yes, non-equilibrium holds to an extent, but at some point you can certainly damage a range by too much livestock. So we need to address it. We need to get on top of it. And we haven't done as good a job as we could have. But it's something we've looked at, like how the grazing has impacted the wildlife, and it does impact them. So that's helped us realize we need to set up core areas. And now the next step is working with the herders to find a good solution. So long-winded. I don't have a good answer, but we need a solution that comes from the bottom up, because that's the only way it's going to be successful. A lot of this stuff is bottom up, and that's why it was so successful. Does that make sense?